As a bit of background, Kristen Ali Eglinton comes to us from the Footage Foundation, where she serves as the co-founder and executive director. She has a background in multimedia art and social and educational research, and she is especially interested in the ways that we can access and amplify the voices of those not often heard, and uses multimedia methods to achieve this. To this end, she is here to talk about an exciting project that is being undertaken by her foundation that utilizes the SDGs as a framework.
Thank you. Oh, that's loud. I'm quite loud to begin with. I don't know if I necessarily need this. So thank you so very much for having me here. I'm super honored. I'm sorry it's during lunch. I have a trouble with public speaking, so I like the lunchtime, so concentrate on your food and sort of glance up at me every once in a while. So I just wanted to also say I'm really sorry that I had missed everyone can hear me, right? That I had missed the morning session. I think it would have been really beneficial to me. We're running a big campaign in New York right now to bring our work into refugee camps in Europe and beyond. And so I've actually been on the streets and working pretty tirelessly this week when we launched. You'll probably see a lot of this campaign because a lot of our content sits there. But so forgive me if I'm a little bit rambly and a little bit, I don't know. I'm here. I'm all here. But the main thing is that I'm hoping that I think you guys have been doing a lot of work this morning around the SDGs. And what I do hope is that we've started to sort of focus on these drivers for change and the ways in which these drivers for change, and I'm going to show them to you, start to catalyze the SDGs through our programs. And so I think maybe kind of one of the things that I could offer you today are some tools or just some food for thought. And I don't come at this as a violence expert. I come at this as a methodologist, as a social scientist, as a person incredibly interested in the ways in which we can amplify the voices of young people and of people in general, as someone that does community needs assessment work using sort of multimedia methods. This project itself, the one that I'm going to show you about today, Girl Talk Girl, focuses on gender-based violence because that was a connection that we saw between the young women in New York City and the young women in Russia. So I'm definitely here to learn from you all in the short time that we have. But what I'll do is I'll do a little bit of our background, and then I'm going to show you our micro-documentary that came out of the Girl Talk Girl project last year. We've been funded twice by the U.S. Department of State. The second round of funding is right now happening. So the documentary is from last year. Just came out, but it's from last year. So I guess a little bit of background on the organization that I founded, which is Footage, that I co-founded with 4 colleagues doing our PhD, is that when I was doing my PhD, I noticed that I trained as a multimedia artist, as a little bit of a background. I also trained in education. And so when I started, and then I became a multimedia ethnographer, so working with communities doing participatory film, digital storytelling, which are just sort of 1 to 2 minute films with image, text, and sound. And what I saw was that these methods were not just methods to understand people and to understand sort of people's rich complexities and their backgrounds and this kind of stuff. They were also, and ways in which we can understand sort of social realities. They were tools of transformation, and I think that sometimes that's lost, that we get this really rich data from these. We use them to understand social realities, but we don't necessarily see them as tools of transformation. And what I did see with the young people I was working with, both in New York City where I worked and up in Yukon Territory, Canada, was that there was a major change in these young people. Now, this is very anecdotal. I wasn't measuring it at the time. We look at it now. We look at it now more substantially, using surveys and interviews. But at the time, what I noticed was an increase in confidence, an increase in empowerment. The substantive area that I was looking at the time is really youth identities. I'm also a compassion researcher. I've done a lot of work in compassion and addiction. And so and even doing those kinds of things, and even the work that I was doing as a consultant, I do a lot of community needs assessment. How can we understand communities? We don't want to just throw money into communities. Let's get underneath the community first. Let's bring them on board in the kinds of programming that we're making. I was using these visual multimedia, a lot of mobile methodologies, a lot of local technologies that we can use, and understanding these communities. And within using them, I saw that there was change being created within the individual and on the collective level. So fast forward a bit, we started Footage Foundation with the goal of using these methods to not only amplify the voices of young people, but to create change within themselves and within their wider community. And that crystallized after a few years. I'm going through this fast, which is good for me. So I think what would be good to show is how we actually is our theory of change, which is here, and I'm sure you can look at that. So we have these 5 drivers of change, and these change are in and of themselves for our programs. They're all connected to research. So for example, we know that an increase in compassion and empathy also correlates highly with positive social and health outcomes. So these are all backed in research. We have a lot of, these are our drivers here. And if you take the time to go into our website, you can see how we understand these kinds of drivers and then how they are all backed by research here. So the things that the drivers do, whatever that may be, lower risk of heart disease, increased immune functioning, this kind of thing. These connect our drivers. And we argue ultimately connect to the SDGs. They catalyze the SDGs. So we don't just see the SDGs as something that are just magically going to happen. Right? We have to have very localized, specific interventions targeted that start with the voices of the people that we want to serve. And that is what we do using these visual methods. So these visual multimedia technological methods. Plus, we encase these within workshops. So in the workshops, young women or young men are using ICTs. They're building leadership skills. And at the same time, and we're going to talk about this, through storytelling, through getting your voice out there, you're starting to feel empowered. You're starting to feel like your story matters. Okay? Then once we have these stories that are out there, these are tools for advocacy. These are tools for awareness. So then we can start to look at prevention. So does anyone have any questions about the drivers in general and how we imagine them? Nothing. Is it pretty straightforward? That's good. Okay. So I want to give you a little bit of background because I think a really good way to show how our drivers work is through our Girl Talk Girl program, which is pretty much our flagship program. So in 2014, 2015, and 2014, the State Department had a call for any kind of project that would foster relations between the US and Russia. So this was a peer-to-peer dialogue award. And what we said was, okay, what is an area, what is an area that is going to connect young people, and particularly young women, which is a group I'm extremely passionate about? How are we going to connect these women? And so what we did was we thought of a common thread between them, which is violence against women. They're all going to have these experiences on some kind of level, and they can start to connect through that. We wanted to bring in the idea of compassion and empathy. We think that compassion and empathy it's at the heart of all of our programs. And let me just backtrack a little bit. We see empathy, obviously, as sort of looking through the eyes of others, but what compassion does is it enfolds empathy and it sparks action. So I always see compassion as empathy plus action, something that can happen. We can use this, we can all say, let's increase empathy, it does this, but once we bring compassion in there, we have action. And also once you have compassion in there, we know that an increase in self-compassion and compassion for other leads to increased altruism, and then all these other points that we had pointed out before. So we need to go beyond empathy, we need to bring in compassion, and we need to go beyond that, we need to bring in sort sort of compassionate action. So a lot of our work is based on this. Things where when you hear someone's story, you feel less alone, you feel less shame, okay? Things, another driver is community. When I see your connection, when I tell my story, this idea that you're only as sick as your secrets. When I tell my story of violence or when something that happened to me, then suddenly I'm released of this burden. And then at the same time, someone sees it. And if they say, you were brave enough to tell your story, I'm going to tell mine in the one instance, or in two, I'm not the only one. And here's this young woman that's 5,000 miles away from me having this same experience. So we become part of this community of experience. And this is incredibly empowering. And this leads to health benefits that we've actually documented. And you can, if you want to take a good look through our website, you can see that. So the Girl Talk Girl program, we decided to use storytelling, which I see as a really, really powerful tool for connection and empathy and also for compassion. If we think about it, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Paulo Freire's conscientization, this idea that if you tell your story and you read your story again and you talk about it, then you can reflect back on that story and you become conscious of that story and you can start creating change. Okay, so you can start creating the change. So the change is happening within the individual young person as well as outside within the community. It starts to become very collective. Plus, you have all these young people, all these young women starting to form this grassroots movement at this point, and it becomes a larger sort of, what we like to think of as a compassionate community where people can go to and feel less alone. These are also tools for advocacy. There's a lot of empowerment in saying my story has now been used for the greater good. My story, and now these are also like that's empowering, and then we have the advocacy as tools themselves, so this becomes a resource for that. So anyway, we decided to bring them together through storytelling, and we decided to use an app that I had helped develop out in South Africa years before through a human-centered design process. I don't know if anyone's familiar with human-centered design. It's basically designing with communities. So rather than saying to the communities, here, use this technology, we localize everything, we design with them. The young women got ICT skills. They sat there, they looked at the interface. We took them through the whole process, and we redesigned a phone that I had already built out in South Africa through a design process in a community that had no internet or electricity. So it was a very egalitarian phone application. It does not use video, so this way the bandwidth, we don't have to worry about it. Everything can go via Bluetooth. It can be used on any phone, Java phones, it can be used on Android phones. And we were pretty adamant. We brought two phones to the young women, two applications. We said, you choose, which one do you want to tell your story on about violence? Which do you think is the most appropriate? So they chose, and then from there, they actually localized the phone. We have local resources that we can upload. It could be here right now. There's our toolkit that the young women helped design. We have local resources linked to phones, so you can go into the phone, you can find out facts, you can find out glossaries, and the young women populated these. Okay, so we can still update these if we want to. They can send us. We have, I can look right here. We have safe and dangerous routes home that people can have in their phones locally, and they can send this to us. But they also did things like, I want to change the voice on this. I don't want my voice to people to recognize my voice. I want it to be anonymous. I want it to be, so we brought all these functions back to our computer scientist. We negotiated with him for a long time, figuring out what was possible, what we could do. And then a few months later, we did pilot stories. They beta tested the young women. And then we brought the stories out for a second round in New York City and again in St. Petersburg, Russia. So we worked with the young women there again, and we took them through the full digital storytelling workshop. These are mobile digital stories, slightly different. A lot of people just do the digital stories, which are 1 to 2 minute films. Sometimes they're 5 minutes, using image, text, sound, often using video. We X the video because we want it to be more egalitarian. We want people to be able to use it. We also feel that you reflect on your own story a lot more if you're not using video. Video, you're just sort of holding up. But if you're thinking about your image, you're thinking about your text, they all come in pieces. And I have the app here if you wanted to peek at it. And so during those workshops, we did scripting, we did the sharing of the stories, and in each of these workshops, our monitoring and evaluating is really, we're incredibly into it. This This NGO was founded by 5 researchers. And so we're a little nuts with it, but we do surveys. We make sure that we're starting to hit these drivers of change. We start to look at and measure how can is the compassion being increased? Are there CT skills being increased? But most of all, we do in-depth interviews. I'm a qual person, so we're in there, we're doing these kinds of interviews, we're getting case studies on stories from them, and we're seeing how these are working. So after we did the stories with them, we screened the stories, we share the stories, we did an international Google Dialogue event where the young women came together online, and in that, we developed resource guides. And these are free online. This is an open source toolkit that you can use that includes discussions on 4 of the stories that are also downloadable. But importantly, what it includes, and I think this is super important because I think everything needs to start with the voices of the young people themselves. In our first workshop, we never ever said to them, this is what violence is. That was it. What is violence? And the violences that they came up with were things I would never have dreamed of. Whether it was inequality and exclusion, they are, but we wouldn't have thought to say to them, okay, is this? They went very, very, very deep into it. And they said, no, of course this is. So all of the violences are listed in here, the ways in which the young women saw them. We have on here our stories. But the way that we sort of break them up here is kind of respect and values, landscapes we navigate. Back to our stories forum and our scale up award that we're working on right now. Right now we're working on an award where 5 young women in New York City and 5 young women in St. Petersburg, Russia that have taken part in our programs have now gone through an intense leadership training, and they are on the streets now making stories with other young women. They are paid for their time, so we're looking at decent jobs for youth. All these young women have been compensated. Their time is incredibly valuable. We also have leaders on this forum that get a stipend for commenting, for keeping these forums going. So if we were to, I'm not sure if she has anything under hers yet, but if we were to go here, oh, I don't know. Yeah, there's some comments there in both Russian and English with the girls having a conversation around these stories. And so I encourage you to look at these. And you can download them. What we hope is that people will start to use these with groups that they work with, and what we'd love to see is to start measuring what it looks like. What does it look like when you're hearing stories from other people? You know, how, and ultimately getting them involved in this. So let me just quickly go to the drivers, and then I'll show the micro documentary. It's only 8 minutes long. So let me see where we are. Let me know if I'm talking too fast or if you have questions. All right, I want to illustrate, before I show the documentary, I want to illustrate 2 of our drivers. So one of the drivers that I had showed before, we have, say, compassion and empathy. We have the what an increase in compassion and empathy can do in sort of physical and mental health, social well-being. These are connected. The goals that our programs are able to touch on are listed on this page because compassion and empathy is at our core. But in the other goals, maybe we just have 2 or 3 listed. I mean, arguably, these drivers go across most of our goals, right? And we don't, like I said again, we don't just see the SDGs as something that are just going to magically happen. There has to be a mechanism for change. There has to be a mechanism that we're sort of narrowing in on when we're doing these interventions and programming that can get us there. Otherwise, and those need to be very targeted. And these could be targeted to the targets within each of the Sustainable Development Goals. So we started a CauseVox campaign. I don't know if any of you heard of it, so I hope you don't think I'm being terribly tacky. We just, I promise I'm not promoting it, but it's where all of our information is sitting right now. So we've only been live for about 24 hours, maybe 36, so we're not doing terrible. And what we are raising for is to bring this program and Voice Methods program, seeking the voice of young women refugees, because we know, and the International Rescue Committee just came out with this in a big report, that accessing the voices of young women is the #1 step in mitigating violence against women, but also within the camps, but also developing programming for them. So we're raising to go into there. So what we did was we're having a campaign that's enfolded within this. That is 10 days, 10 voices, 1 world. And every other day, We show so we opened up with our microdoc. Yesterday we did compassion experience. So we're showing our drivers. We're showing how they work. If we can show this, if we can say that, yes, this is what we do, this is our awareness, and then hopefully people will see the ways in which these storytelling and these kinds of projects can make a difference. So this is they're a little funky. So, but they're for the general public, but I like them. They're distilled. I encourage you to go to our website if you want the more academic, if you want to look at the research, but just one of these so far. I'll show you compassion and empathy that we're looking at. There's our drivers there. So we have one of these for each of our drivers because we think it's really good for the public to just get a grasp on how these things actually work. And then from there, like I said, if people were very, very interested, they can go into our website and look more deeply at this. Then we have, for each of the other days, we have, say, the different violences that the young women have actually come up with. We can show you one, and then we'll go into the documentary.
Прошло уже 4 года, и этот случай не выходит у меня из головы. Когда мне было 17 лет, знакомые предложили нам с подругой съездить за город на день рождения. И так как я была подростком, то я и подумать не могла, что когда-нибудь меня изнасилуют.
And as time went on, my mother finally got the strength and courage to leave my father. Although my mother left my father, the abuse continued. This time from my brother.
По работе я общаюсь с женщинами, которые пострадали от насилия, и сейчас я понимаю, почему молчала и молчит моя тетя, делая вид, что все хорошо. Ей стыдно. Я поняла свою тетю только тогда, когда заговорили другие.
So these are part of our 10-day campaign, and they'll be in so every day. So right now we're on day 3 of this. So I think without further ado, I should show the 8-minute documentary. And I think I can do that on Vimeo. Please keep ignoring the call to action, which is embedded right now in all of our videos. We'll be removing that after the 30 days, but whoops.
Am I pretty?
I grew up as an only child in New York.
Я никогда этого не понимала. Почему она делает вид, что у нее все хорошо?
Size 10, plump lips, thick thighs, broad hips, and dark eyes?
Feeling hands pulling my legs apart.
I've watched my mother get punched, slapped, and constantly degraded by my father.
Твою тетю только тогда, когда заговорили другие.
What makes you think you can touch me?
Да еще не знала, что такое абьюз и что слова нет священно.
Bulimia is definitely a huge addiction. I was always in different homes. I always felt like I didn't belong. They all said, don't be like your mother. I knew what she was doing was not on the right track.
Without thinking it through, you all agreed to go.
I had never been followed before. I felt he hated us.
As you get older, you think everything they tell you and everything they do to you think is okay.
His muscle and body heat radiates on top of me.
Я верю в это счастливое будущее, и это придает мне сил жить дальше.
I joined the Girl Talk Girl project because it finally allows us girls to have a safe space to talk about issues that we have, one of them being domestic violence.
I like being a part of experiences and stuff that'll mean something. Putting my time and my energy into things that are going to better the world.
It's very interesting to learn about American girls' opinions.
Because of this project, I become think about safety, about women's safety. Потому что они должны знать, что их мысли, их чувства, они имеют значение. Они не что-то глубоко личное и сакральное, а что-то, о чем они должны говорить, о чем они должны делиться.
I like people and the socializing and the good vibes and the important information that I'm receiving will be helpful throughout my future.
I guess I get to learn more about other females my age.
Когда я в нем узнала, я поняла, насколько это важно, что есть очень много людей, с которыми случалось и случается до сих пор очень много плохого, и им всем нужна помощь.
Anything that is for girls around the world, an outlet for them to channel anything, whether it be good or bad, or something to just make them feel like they're not alone in the world, it needs to happen.
I want to educate ourselves and learn from one another as well.
I think self-esteem is like very low in girls these days.
It shows how strong women can be in different nationalities, in different countries. It doesn't matter where you are.
I feel like it's a step towards talking about it more than we do right now, and we should talk about it.
Women's rights are something that's definitely I'm passionate about, and I'm really excited to work with all these other wonderful young women and hopefully start a dialogue that gets discussed across the world.
Черный. Это было после собрания. Он сказал, что хочет обсудить мои политические взгляды. Тогда я еще не знала, что такое абьюз и что слова «нет» священно. Я Мономурна, а у тебя есть девушка. Я знаю вас, анархисток, вы спите со всеми подряд. Он стал лезть ко мне и пытался целовать меня. Мне было стыдно, потому что все смотрели на нас. Он схватил меня за лицо и притянул к себе. Его язык был у меня во рту. Мерзкий, гадкий и склизкий. Я его ненавижу. И мой флаг окрашен в цвет моей ненависти.
I grew up as an only child in New York. I was affected by intense violence in my house between my parents. My father had a severe alcohol problem. My mother would always defend herself. And one night, she bashed my father's head into our living room table. It was glass. It had a candle on it. She used so much force the glass shattered. Instantly, my father called the police, and my mother was arrested and taken to a local precinct. I was surprised that my father called the police. My mother never called the cops on my father, but he called the cops on her.
We know deep down that there's this really human level that we all have and we all experience, but just to like physically see it and be reminded of it.
I wanted to learn and gain more experience on the specific topic about, violence against women in general, so that way I would be able to, take something away from this program and, share it with other young women my age, and I feel like it has made a huge impact.
I feel like I contributed something, but I feel like I gained more. I feel like I got more. I feel like mine was just a drop in the bucket compared to what I've learned and what I've seen and what I would take home and what I can now view and understand from not only girls here but girls abroad.
I want to talk about violence against women. You should feel safe talking to your peers, especially other women, about the experiences that you've went through. It shouldn't be the elephant in the room or a taboo subject. It should be something we can discuss like adults.
Начала задумываться над теми темами, которые я раньше так и не замечала, что это является насилием, потому что это присутствует вообще везде. Как бы после этого семинара я начала как-то глубже об этом думать и видеть вот эти вот несправедливости, как-то по-другому относиться к этому.
Fixing you, changing you, and it's nothing wrong with you. Perfect, just the way you are.
I really enjoyed the whole journey. It's really cool to use your story for something good. I just really hope people feel, that it's something that empowers them and lifts them up and say like, hey, I can do it too.
Anything I can do to help women and to help women be better, I'm down for it.
Знаете, я никогда бы не подумала, что свою историю буду рассказывать всему миру. Не в плане не всему миру. Просто когда хочется это сказать, высказать, да. Естественно, я взяла историю с изнасилованием свою, потому что я другую, самую такую болезненную, не знаю, где ее взять. Вот самая болезненная, я ее высказала, причем так я ее высказала, что вот прям как, чтобы еще раз, чтобы еще раз когда-нибудь приехали, чтобы мы еще раз встретились вообще, чтобы не забывали.
Because if I was brave enough to say my story, hopefully someone else out there will be like, oh wait, maybe I'm not the only one,
That's it. Thank you for watching. Thank you. Every time I watch it, I'm in a heap.